Chapter 15. Telltale File. Bess and George and Carla hurried off. Before Nancy began her search, she turned to Mapani. "Will you go back and talk to that workman? I think he speaks Quechua. Find out what the senor he mentioned looked like." "I will do that. Then I will start a search too for this Luis Losa," the Indian promised. By this time, several groups of tourists had arrived to see the ruins. As each girl came upon a group, she asked if anyone had seen a man who answered the description of Losa. None of them had. On one of the stairways, Bess encountered a young man. He stopped climbing, but instead of answering her question, he motioned for her to sit on the steps with him. "Thank you, I will stand," Bess replied. In broken English, the stranger told her he was a Peruvian. "You are a beautiful girl from North America," he said. "I like you. We make date, maybe." In her own mind, Bess decided that he was the last person in the world with whom she wanted to make a date. She did not answer, but repeated her question. "Have you seen a man who is thin and dark and has shifty eyes?" The young man began to laugh. "You forget about that one. Tonight we make date." Bess was furious. She turned away and began to climb the steps. The Peruvian laughed. "Oh, you afraid of me? You are American girl, they say, is choosy." "I certainly am," Bess said with dignity, and hurried up the steps with the speed of a frightened alpaca. Her admirer did not try to follow. By the time Bess reached the top step, she was winded and had to sit down. "George was right. I shouldn't have eaten all that corn and Swiss cheese," she berated herself. Then she thought wistfully, why couldn't he have been one of the nice young Peruvian men, like the ones Carla introduced us to? Bess remained quiet, even after she had stopped gasping. She could vaguely hear two men talking somewhere near her. The men were coming closer. In a few moments, what they were saying became very distinct. At first, Bess paid no attention, thinking they were tourists talking about a group of girls. But suddenly she was shocked when one man, who sounded like Luis Losa, said, "You tell Nancy Drew she is a nuisance in Peru. She must go home at once." Bess's heart began to pound. There was no question in her mind but that the voice belonged to Luis Losa. What should she do? Should she let the man know she had heard him and demand an explanation? "But he might harm me," was her second thought, "and then I couldn't warn Nancy." Nevertheless, Bess decided to be courageous. She got up and looked around for the two speakers, but could see no one. Bess ran up and down a few of the ancient alleyways, but could not find Luis Losa. "I must alert Nancy," she thought. Trying to find her proved to be hopeless. Bess called Nancy's name several times, but received no answer. Presently, another thought came to Bess. Suppose Luis Losa was on his way to the hotel to steal the precious plaque. Probably he knew that Nancy had retrieved it from the gift shop. Bess figured that the gang had not been able to decipher any more than the girls had. "I'll bet they don't want Nancy to keep the plaque for fear she'll solve its mystery before they can. I'd better hurry back and stop Losa from getting it." Bess ran practically all the way to the hotel. She obtained the key to Nancy and Carla's room, quickly ran up the stairs, and let herself in. Then she locked the door and immediately dashed to the bureau drawer where the plaque had been placed. It was still there. "Thank goodness!" Bess exclaimed. She sat down in a chair to catch her breath and wait. Minutes passed. No one came. Bess was beginning to think that her hunch had been wrong when she heard footsteps in the hall. They stopped in front of the door. Bess held her breath and listened. No key was inserted into the lock, but the doorknob turned. Then she heard a scraping sound. "Someone is trying to jimmy the door open," she thought. "Oh, what shall I do?" She was afraid to keep still, but more afraid to cry out. Tensely, Bess watched the door. Presently, a long, thin file came sliding through the crack. Within moments, the implement protruded into the room about 2 inches. Bess's mouth was dry with fright. "In another moment, that intruder will get in," she thought wildly. "And no telephone here." A sudden idea came to her. She crossed the room softly, grabbed the file, and gave it a hard yank. The whole tool came through the crack. Instantly, she heard angry mutterings in the hall. Someone kicked the door, then ran down the hall. Bess was so amazed and relieved that she flopped onto the bed, still clutching the file. In the meantime, the other girls and Mapani had continued to hunt through the ruins and question people about the mysterious senor. Finally, George encountered a broad-shouldered woman with a deep, husky voice. In response to the girl's query, she looked hard at her questioner. "I don't know what girls are coming to these days. Always chasing a man. Is this one you're after, somebody who wants to get away from you?" "Oh, no," George said quickly. "It's nothing like that." The woman interrupted her. "That's what all girls say, but I know better. You're after him and you're determined to find him." George smiled. "You're right, but my interest in finding him is because he's a thief." The woman's eyes bulged. "A thief? Well, why didn't you say so in the first place?" George felt like telling her she had had no opportunity, but repeated her original question. "Please tell me if you saw him." "Yes, I did," the woman replied. "The Lima police are looking for him," George told her. The woman pointed in the direction of the girls' hotel. "The man was heading down there," she said. "If you want to catch him, you'd better hurry." George thanked her, and as the young sleuth hastened away, the woman called, "I'm sorry I said what I did to you." George waved at her and smiled. Upon reaching the hotel, George got the key to her room and went upstairs. As she unlocked the door, Bess opened the one to Nancy's room. "Oh, George, I'm so glad to see you. Something dreadful happened." She held up the file and poured out her story. Her cousin was amazed. "You sure came through that time," George said. "By the way, I hurried back here because a woman up at the ruins told me Luis Losa was headed this way. Probably he was the person with the file." "I'm sure he was," Bess replied. "Thank goodness he has left here." "What do you mean?" George asked. Bess explained that she had looked out the window and had seen Luis Losa drive off a short time before in a private car. "This was the only reason I dared unlock the door and come into the hall just now." Bess went on to tell the bits of conversation she had overheard in the ruins. "I wonder who the man was that Luis Losa was talking to. He may still be around and harm Nancy." "You're right," George agreed. "We must warn her." She took the file from Bess and walked to the window in Nancy's room to examine the tool carefully. "I suppose Losa's fingerprints are on it," she said, "but ours are also." An instant later, she said excitedly, "Look, there's a name on here. Velez. I'll bet this file was stolen from Jorge Velez's shop." Both girls were sure that it was one of the tools Luis Losa had stolen from his employer's workroom. George tossed the file on the bureau. "Let's go," she urged. "We must find Nancy." Suddenly the sunlight outside faded and it began to rain hard. At the same moment, Carla came into the room. "I just made it," she said. "Mapani is downstairs. He said we were going to have a downpour. By the way, the description that workman in the ruins gave him of the senor matches Luis Losa perfectly." "That villain!" George cried out indignantly. "And listen to this." She and Bess told the story of the threat to Nancy and showed Carla the file. Carla was amazed. "By the way, where is Nancy?" she inquired. George suggested that since all the tourists were coming back because of the rain, Nancy might be downstairs talking with some of them. The girls locked their doors and went to the first floor. People were milling about the lobby and lounge of the hotel. Nancy was not among them. The girls found Mapani seated on a chair in a corner of the lounge. When he heard that Nancy had not returned and was told the other events of the afternoon, he became alarmed. This man, Luis Losa, after he drove off, he could have sneaked back on foot and found Miss Drew in the ruins. Yes, Carla agreed. And do not forget the man he was talking to. Oh dear, why did I ever get Nancy into this dreadful mess? There is only one thing for us to do, George said grimly. We must all go back and find Nancy at once. Rain or no rain. End of chapter 15.